Plato wrote about a place called Atlantis. Said he got the story from Egyptian priests,
who supposedly had ancient records of it.
Egypt was famous for documenting pretty much everything. So if those scrolls really existed,
where are they now?
And if Atlantis was wiped out in a single day and night,
what kind of cataclysm could erase a whole civilization?
That fast, and could it happen again? These are unsolved mysteries
surrounding the lost city of Atlantis.
So everything we know about Atlantis
really starts with Plato.
In his writing from around 360 BCE,
he describes a massive
island civilization that existed
about 9,000 years before his time.
He said the story of Atlantis was passed down to him from a respected Athenian statesman who supposedly heard the story from Egyptian priests. According to Plato, the priests had records going back thousands of years and described Atlantis as
a powerful and advanced society
that tried to conquer parts of Europe and Africa. For being destroyed and sinking into the sea, historians have been debating the existence of Atlantis.
Ever since.
Was Plato writing about Atlantis in a non-literal sense? Was he using it as a cautionary tale
about greed and bad leadership?
That's one possibility, but maybe he was actually passing on something.
He believed to be true the story includes
very specific references to geography, technology, and war. It doesn't sound like fake symbolism. In his words, there was an island situated in front of the straits. The island was larger than Libya and Asia put together,
and was the way to other islands.
From these,
you might pass to the whole of the opposite continent.
Surrounded the true ocean. Seems pretty specific.
But whether he believed it himself,
or was using a fictional story with historical framing, never really know for sure.
But if the ancient Egyptians really did have
records of Atlantis, where are those records now?
Well, let's talk more about that.
Egypt was one of the most meticulous ancient cultures
when it came to documenting history.
So where's the proof? If the priests really knew about Atlantis,
those records had to exist at some point.
Were they lost over time, destroyed in fires, like the one that wiped out the Library of Alexandria? Or were they hidden away somewhere? Some people think the story was erased on purpose.
That the ancient Egyptian
records of Atlantis were found later,
but were destroyed cause.
They clashed with the worldview of whoever rediscovered them.
But maybe the records are still out there,
buried somewhere in the sand. One of the weirdest things about the Atlantis story
is how fast it all went. Plato says
the entire island was wiped out
in a single day and night of misfortune.
One day there was this huge
wealthy society, the next it was under the ocean.
Whether you believe the story or not,
that level of destruction raises some questions.
What kind of disaster could realistically
wipe out a civilization that quickly?
Maybe a massive volcanic eruption, or a chain of tsunamis triggered by an undersea earthquake.
Others bring up the idea of a comet,
or an asteroid strike.
It's also worth noting that, around 16 BCE,
the Minoan civilization on Santorini was hit with one of the largest volcanic eruptions in human history. Timing doesn't line up exactly with Plato's version,
but was pretty much instant destruction.
So it's not like a city
quickly getting swallowed by the sea
is unheard of. There's also the chance that the story of Atlantis is a kind of combination of real disasters, all stitched together into one dramatic story. One of the reasons Atlantis keeps getting talked about
is that no one can agree
on where it was supposed to actually be. Plato said it was beyond the Pillars of Hercules,
which is usually understood to mean
past the Strait of Gibraltar.
So naturally,
people started looking west toward the Atlantic Ocean. But over the years,
theories have put Atlantis just about everywhere.
The Mediterranean, of course.
The Caribbean, Antarctica.
Even under the Sahara Desert.
There is a spot in southern Spain too,
near a national park,
that some think fits the description.
The truth is there's no solid
physical evidence linking any place to Atlantis.
Just educated guesses, some satellite images, and, of course, a considerable amount of imagination. That's part of why the mystery is so enduring.
Though,
there's just enough ambiguity in Plato's description for people to bend
it to fit whatever theory they're pushing.
And the more locations get brought up,
the harder it is to figure out
if we're even looking in the right place.
Begin with Plato talked about Atlantis.
Insane wealth and technology.
The story goes they had huge amounts of gold and silver.
The buildings were covered in precious metals. Later stories, not from Plato,
but from people who picked up the legend,
start adding even wilder details.
That there were these mysterious energy crystals.
Flying machines, advanced weapons. Stuff that sounds more like sci-fi than ancient history, but certainly conjures up some pretty amazing images. So much so
That
that
description is pretty much exactly
what Disney depicted in their movie Atlantis. Underrated, by the way.
The question is though,
If a place like that really existed,
how did it all just disappear without a trace?
where's the leftover technology?
the ruins, even if it sank.
You'd think something would be left behind. Well, some
The
say
descriptions of Atlantis' advanced technology,
was probably just a metaphor.
for all their incredible knowledge,
Others argue it was a civilization so ahead of its time
That we wouldn't even recognize what we're looking at.
if we did find evidence of it. Of course,
there are those who think Atlantis has been found,
and is just being covered up. Just off the coast of Bimini in the Bahamas,
There's a strange underwater formation made of large,
flat limestone blocks, stretches for about half a mile and looks, some people like a road or wall. That's LED to
that it
claims.
could be a piece of Atlantis.
The many road
was first brought into the spotlight in the late 60s.
right around the time when interest in Atlantis,
Was getting a second wind.
thanks to books and documentaries, some divers and researchers,
Swore that it looked straight and organized.
to be natural.
Geologists say it's just a natural formation.
Cold reach rock, basically sand and shells. They get packed and harden over time.
Then break apart in straight lines from erosion.
But not everyone buys that.
Some think there's more going on here.
Partly because the waters around Bimini.
Have a bit of a history of strange stories.
Divers have reported what look like stone circles, steps and large grid of blocks. Add to that the predictions of Edgar Cayce, the so-called sleeping prophet, who claimed that parts of Atlantis.
Would rise near Bimini, so
Is Bimini Road really a leftover piece of Atlantis?
Or just a bunch of rocks, depends who you ask.
Cultures all over the
have
world,
ancient stories about massive floods.
wiping out cities or even entire civilizations. You got the biblical flood with Noah's Ark.
For example,
The ancient Sumerians had the Epic of Gilgamesh, which talks about a great flood. The Greeks had the Clonians' flood.
the Native American tribes.
Indian texts, Chinese legends, all tell of these huge floods sent by the gods. It makes you wonder,
If all these stories are talking about same event.
or at least the same kind of event, seen through different cultural lenses.
Maybe thousands of years ago,
Sea levels rose after the Ice Age,
or a comet hit the Earth and set off massive flooding.
and different groups just passed the memory down. In their own way, if something like that did happen,
Atlantis might not be the only city that we lost.
maybe it's just the most famous. We gave to a whole bunch of sunken places that have never been found. Out of all the historical explanations for
The
Atlantis,
Minoan theory is probably the one.
taken most seriously, the Minoans lived on Crete, nearby islands like Santorini.
Around 3000 to 1100 BCE.
They were incredibly advanced for their time.
They had huge palaces running water.
They even had flushing toilets.
And around 16 BCE,
A massive volcanic eruption hit Santorini.
The explosion was so huge, it blew part of the island apart, sent ash across the area, and caused huge tsunamis.
it was one of the most powerful eruptions in human history. Some think that disaster helped bring down the Minoan civilization.
Or at least left them weakened and vulnerable.
Checks a lot of Atlantis boxes though.
You have your advanced society, sudden destruction and island setting, connection to the Mediterranean,
Of course, the timing doesn't fully match up with Plato's story.
which places Atlantis about 9,000 years before his time.
Again, was he just exaggerating though? Using a real event and changing the timeline a bit. To make it more dramatic, who knows? But if Atlantis was based on any real civilization, the Minoans are definitely a strong contender. Sounds completely wild. Some people think Atlantis is buried under the ice. In Antarctica, the theory mostly comes from old maps, like the Piri-Reis map from the 1500s.
Which seems to show parts of Antarctica without ice.
There was a brief period around 12,000 years ago, right at the end of the last ice
When
age,
Earth's climate shifted.
that just happens to be around the same time.
Plato said Atlantis was destroyed. So the theory goes that maybe there was a civilization in Antarctica back then, before it was even covered in ice at some huge event. Maybe natural, maybe not.
Froze it and buried everything. It's a long shot, but some people wonder, because no one really knows what's under all that ice.
Antarctica
is about as locked down and mysterious as it gets now.
We're really getting into the deep end.
Some people believe Atlantis wasn't an advanced human civilization. It was either founded by aliens, built with alien help, or was just a full-on alien base.
It sounds crazy,
But the logic behind it goes a bit like this.
if the Atlanteans really did have flying machines and death rays or some kind of free energy technology, where did that knowledge come from?
Definitely wasn't normal for the time.
Some say they were using technology that wouldn't show up on Earth again
For thousands of years.
Some of it doesn't even exist today, so that kind of jump doesn't make sense
Unless someone or something gave them a boost.
And there are ancient myths from all over the world that talk about beings from the sky, sharing advanced knowledge with the mortals below. Of course, historians don't really buy any of this.
But
the theory answers a lot of questions about Atlantis.
Mainly,
Why we haven't found any definitive evidence of it. Advanced extraterrestrials
may have had a method of disposing of any remnants of it.
I've been your host, James.
I'll catch you, yes.